Hello and welcome, everyone. We're glad you can join us this evening. And hopefully everyone can hear us all right. Tonight, we're going to be really rolling up our sleeves and taking a very serious look at the nuts and bolts of what we're facing. Not just ourselves on the path, but this whole humanity. We often talk about doing the shadow work, working on our egos, integrating the shadow self, if you follow Carl Jung's vernacular with the relation to our dark side. But it's one thing to speculate about it or intellectualize about it or want to do something about it or even observe yourself to a degree. Today, we want to take a deep dive into some of our own experiences and some of the experiences of those who are very close to us. Now, they will remain safely anonymous. We're not going to be giving away anybody's identity here. But it's important that we recognize how serious the situation is. It's not enough. The work is not some sort of blasé, sort of part-time activity. This is something that it doesn't need to, we don't have to become obsessed over it. We're not here to encourage anybody to become fanatical or obsessive compulsive about the work. But we need to keep it very much in the back of our mind all the time and in the forefront of our consciousness, in the forefront of our mindfulness practice. One eye in, one eye out, and observing how we react and how we react to circumstances. And we're not talking about response now, we're talking about reaction. The automatic, mechanical, immediate, knee-jerk reaction that we experience in our mind, in our heart, or in our body, or in all three, or in any combination of those. And the body consists of three centers in the physical body, the motor, the instinctive, and the sexual centers. And we can experience mechanical automatic reactions in one or more of those centers, just as we can experience them in our mental center or our emotional center. And oftentimes, one will lead to the other. So we can feel anger or fear or some other emotional reaction to something, and then immediately thoughts will generate, and thoughts will start, a stream of consciousness of thoughts related to that emotion or will follow. So our reaction might begin in one center and then very quickly migrate to another center. We need to observe how these things happen. Now, of course, very often, we can also observe the physical body and recognize sources of tension, sources of stress, muscles clenching, fists clenching, our back getting up, our posture changing, our teeth gritting and grinding, our clenching our jaw, clenching, these types of things. What's going on there? It's important to recognize that and really ask what's going on? What's causing this mechanical automatic reaction? And it's not enough to say, oh, well, that's normal. It's not normal. It's normal for a humanity that is fallen. It's normal for a humanity that's asleep. It's normal only, it's because it's been normalized. But this is not how human beings behave. This is not how enlightened human beings, true human beings behave. It's not how a Buddha behaves. Even though he might experience automatic reactions because he may not have eliminated all the egos from his 3 brains and 5 centers, but he allows the impressions to come and to pass. He transforms the impressions through consciousness by observing it, saying, oh, there's fear, there's pride, there's lust, there's greed, there's shame, there's whatever. And hopefully we all know what we're talking about when we talk about egos. For a quick refresher, let us recall that the egos were very aptly and succinctly summarized, not just by St. Augustine and some of the other mystical saints of Christianity, but also Dante and others. And they summarize them, or they characterize them as the 7 deadly sins. These we might consider from our own vantage point the 7 prime evils, or the 7 prime egos, to use the simple metaphysical terminology. But egos have many names. They've been called egos, they've been called eyes, they've been called nafs in Sufi mysticism, and indeed in the other sects of Islam. They've been called demons and devils, sins, of course, the 7 deadly sins in Christianity and Catholicism. And in Buddhism, they're referred to as psychological aggregates. Now, psychological aggregates has a very kind of metaphysical, scientific, almost clinical type of connotation to it. An aggregate, as you know, is something which is an amalgamation of many, many smaller parts. So in the aggregate, it becomes something. So psychological aggregates are themselves made up of smaller pieces, smaller parts, multiplicity. And we may say that as these aggregates affect us, and we give in to them as we identify with them, and give in to them, indulge them, they multiply like any sort of virus or any sort of bacteria. They capture our consciousness, they capture first our attention, our consciousness, and they steal our vital energy, our sexual force. We give energy to these psychological aggregates, these egos, and that's what they feed on. And of course, the only reason why something would feed on something, not just for survival, but so that they can remain in activity, but most importantly, so that they can reproduce. And if something is feeding on the sexual force, which is the creative force, you can be damned sure that that ego is multiplying. It's strengthening itself. These psychological aggregates which make up that ego are strengthening. It's growing in power. And there are endless science fiction movies that we could reference here, where some sort of a monster or adversary, some nemesis to the hero, seeks to get its hands on the power source, the power cell, and then it grafts onto that power cell and starts sucking the power out of the spaceship or out of the power plant or out of whatever. And as it sucks that power, it becomes so much more stronger and so much more potent and so much more dangerous to the hero. This is an allegory for ego. This is exactly what ego does. And the more powerful it becomes, the greater likelihood it has of influencing us, seducing us, tempting us, and ultimately enslaving us, because that's their job, that's their goal, and that's their job, to make us fall asleep, and to basically be their slaves, their plaything, their toy, their the source of their energy, and the means by which they can act out their programming in the world. Because the other implication of psychological aggregate, the other suggestion there, is the fact that egos are, we'll just go here. Egos are mechanical. They're practically digital. They have a program and they follow their program. They follow their programming. All they want to do is execute their programming. So fear wants to express fear. Lust wants to lust and have itself indulged because it wants to replicate. It wants to multiply. Like any virus, like any bacteria, it's a primal instinct. And these egos can only express what they are. They are, in that sense, a manifestation and an expression of the great I am that I am. An ego is what it is. And the question is, well, how does an ego actually function if it's such a primal, primitive sort of thing? If it's so basic and it's so mechanical, how is it possible that as it expresses itself through us, through people, it seems to have, it has cleverness, it has motivation, it has, I mean, all we have to do is look at the countless characters and villains that we have essentially glorified over the years in our culture. I mean, most recently, one of the great heroic villains, or tragic heroes, depending on how you look at him, but he's a heroic villain because he has no redemption at the end of the second film, is Thanos. And we can look to the James Bond villains. This is just a handful. There's many, many, many more James Bond villains than what you see here. But the James Bond villain is the quintessential nemesis. He's just like Bond. He's suave, he's sophisticated, he's intelligent, he's motivated, he plans, he's methodical. These somehow don't strike us as the activities of what amounts to a bacteria or a virus, right? We see those kinds of monsters and those kinds of creatures in film and television too. And we know the difference between a monster, a mindless, a killing machine, and a suave, sophisticated villain. So here's Darth Vader, one of the most iconic villains of all time, without any question. Ultimately a tragic hero in the sense, because he does find redemption in his story arc. But when we first encounter him, and for the three films, the bulk of the three films of the original trilogy, he's a villain, and he's the right-hand man of Emperor Palpatine, which is another villain. Here's another villain that people remember and kind of admire, or we don't want to necessarily say glorify, but we admire villains. And it's interesting to ask the question, why? Why do we admire villains? And what is our relationship with the villain that we admire admire them so? This, of course, is, again, Alan Rickman, who's unfortunately passed away. But the character of Hans Gruber from the film Die Hard is one of the most iconic villains, certainly from the 80s. Here's another one, Hannibal Lecter. And Hannibal Lecter, like Darth Vader, is glorified, is worshipped, is idolized by many fans. And these are fans, fan is short for fanatic. It's not just people who like the films, but it's people who identify with the films for some reason. And there's a lot of identification going on. Why? Because Hannibal Lecter is ruthless, he's single-minded, he's methodical, he's hyper-intelligent, he's super intelligent, he's masterful. Even from behind plexiglass bars, locked away in solitary confinement in the high security wing of a prison, he can pull the strings and manipulate, and he can be in control of the situation. And we admire that. We look to someone and say, wow, even from prison, even from behind plexiglass, this guy's in control. And this is one of our most iconic villains, also from the 80s. This is Darkness from the film Legend, directed by Ridley Scott. And if you've seen the film, you know that Darkness is really just, that's his name, but he's really like the devil, the Satan. But he also serves a master, an unseen force. And but Tim Curry's performance as Darkness is so subtle and so suave. And despite his somewhat monstrous appearance in that classical devil demon like outfit, that's all, by the way, practical effects. This film came out in like 1982, 83, 84, something like that. There's a very young Tom Cruise in that film, and there was no CGI here. This is all practical effects, practical makeup, and completely convincing. But his performance is not, he's always on the edge of losing his temper and having outbursts. And he's one of these villains that you can't help but identify with, because he's a sympathetic villain. He kind of he seeks love, he seeks a companion, he seeks a partner. And of course he seeks to fulfill his duty to his master. We see in the chat here, Ryu has also included the Joker. And it doesn't matter which version of the Joker you look at. The Joker is another one of those villains who, on the surface, he seemed crazy, out of his mind. But the joke is that's the joke. The Joker is methodical, he's psychotic, but he is absolutely in control, or he feels in control, even as he plays the role of being out of control. The Joker is the great trickster. Joker, right? Loker, Loki. That is, Joker is playing the archetype of Loki, the trickster god, the trickster demon god. And the Joker is a sympathetic character. Depending on which portrayal or which interpretation of it in whatever text you're reading. But the Joker is always somehow sympathetic to us because his nemesis is the Dark Knight. And Batman is not an entirely sympathetic character. He is the Dark Knight. He takes on the shadow. He dances with the devil. And he goes out and he there's an adage, right? Becoming what you behold and rationalizing that you are right to do so. That's Batman's rationalization. Now, he does have a few rules, depending on which version of him that you're following, about, you know, guns and taking life and so on and so forth. But the point here is that we have these villains, and you know in your own life, either yourself or others that you know, others that you've worked with, that you've had relationships with, perhaps people in your family, extended family, acquaintances, people from school. You know, for example, how manipulative narcissists are, and passive-aggressive individuals, and how manipulative they can be. Now, ask yourself, are they really that way? Is that their innermost? Are they acting from their heart? Or are they possessed by narcissism, by pride? And if they're possessed by pride, and egos are psychological aggregates, and they're just mechanical programs, AI programs, how is it that a narcissist can be such a master manipulator? How can any of these villains, because villains are personification of ego, they're personification of the Black Lodge and the global elite and everybody that's doing this terrible stuff on the planet to this humanity behind the scenes, behind the curtain, they're all possessed by ego. They're all possessed by demons. So, but how is that possible when fundamentally we're talking about AI programs? Fear fears. Greed, is greedy. Envy covets. And so on. Lust lusts. So how does lust go from just lusting into the archetype of Dracula, the great seducer? Dracula, Count Dracul. He was Hungarian, actually, Vlad the Impaler. He comes from Wallachia, which is formerly part of Transylvania, which is formerly Hungary. We know a little bit about that individual and his history and the culture from in which he presided. And it's interesting because there's another famous or infamous individual, also Hungarian. She was a countess who bathed in the blood of virgins. And this is well known in Hungary. It's other people call it a folk tale and it's a myth and so on and so forth, but it isn't. It was well known in Hungary. Hungary was, we don't want to get too much on a sidetrack here, but Hungary is a very ancient peoples with a very ancient language that even we recently wrote an article on the Epic of Gilgamesh in response to a Princeton University professor or former Princeton University professor's lecture on the subject. And we had to point out some of the errors that he's made in his interpretations. And it's interesting because in Gilgamesh, God is Anu and the goddess is Ishtar. Now, somewhere along the lines, those two got gender swapped, but in Hungarian, God is Isten and the mother is Anu. The Epic of Gilgamesh is the oldest known written story in the world, in the Sumerian tablets. It is the oldest known story that's been recorded story, recorded legend, myth, whatever you want to call it. And more than one, several, many, in fact, many phonetical words and names can be one-to-one grafted onto Hungarian, and they make perfect sense. That's how old and ancient the Hungarian language is. It's the most difficult language in the world to learn, by far. That's not according to me. That's according to Harvard linguistics professors who did a study on this. And we're not going to give you a lecture in Hungarian grammar, but Hungarian is one of the most onomatopoeic and phonetical, i.e. mantric languages in the world. It most closely resembles the language of the supernal worlds of Absolute. If you've read Gurdjieff and you've read those ridiculously long words in Gurdjieff, the holy Trogo Auto Egocrat, I'm not even getting that right, but it's the language of the supernal world of Absolute is absolute and it is perfect, meaning syllables are linked together, and that's how words are created and meaning is created, and tremendous meaning can be created in a word just by continually linking more syllables, more sounds, more phonetic sounds together, and just chaining them together. That's exactly how Hungarian works. And that's what makes Hungarian so difficult to learn, because there are words in Hungarian that are this long. And they go from one syllabic words down to 20, 30 syllabic words. And it is a word, and it does have meaning. It is grammatically and linguistically correct. And from a one syllable word, you can extrapolate 30 different words that have aspects of the same core words, just in different applications, different meanings, different uses, different applications. So that's a little bit of a tangent there, but we just share this with you because there's a reason why we were born into a Hungarian family and why we were born with that language. Because that language and the grammar of the language and the structure and the linguistics of the language allow us to have tremendous insight into other languages. And the Hungarian runes are even more powerful and more interesting. And perhaps in some future live stream, we'll go over some of them and reveal just how magical and informative and telling the Hungarian runic system is, and how different sounds and mantric sounds and their runes, unlike other runes from other systems, the runes in Hungarian reveal a great deal about the mantras, the mantric sounds of the letters that they represent, or the sounds that they represent more accurately. Because again, Hungarian is a very phonetic language. Hungarian also allowed us to speak Japanese without an accent when we lived in Japan, because Japan is the same language tree. So the phonetic sounds are identical, and it's also a very onomatopoeic, phonetic, mantric language, strung together the same way. So the cadence is the same, the emphasis is the same, the language itself is very different, but the foundations are the same. And again, so unfortunately, that meant when I introduced myself, Hajimemashite, watashi wa Teranbai desu. The person listening to that would assume that I was a gaijin who had lived in Japan for the past 20 years and that I could speak fluent Japanese. And then they would respond, assuming that I could speak fluent Japanese. And I'd have to go, oh, wait, what can I, sumimasen, I don't understand, right? wait, hold up, hold your horses. And they would go, hey? They couldn't figure out how someone who speaks perfectly without an accent doesn't know the language. They couldn't put two and two together. Well, how could you, right? Imagine somebody getting off the boat and saying hello to you in perfect English or perfect whatever language is your native tongue, and then say, but I don't understand it, but I speak perfectly. It was an interesting thing. However, again, getting off on a tangent, let's bring it back to Wallachia and Count Dragul. This ancient nature of Hungarians means that a lot of ancient magic and a lot of ancient stuff came packaged with the Hungarians. I mean, let's face it, Attila the Hun, was a predecessor of King Arpad II, who became the first Roman Catholic king of Hungary. But he's the one who brought the Magyars into the Carpathian Basin. The Magyars were an offshoot tribe of the Attila the Hun. After Attila the Hun died, the Huns broke up into different tribes because, of course, they couldn't gel together without his leadership. So after he died, all his sons and so on, they all started fighting for power, and so to speak. So that happened. In any case, Count Dragul and what we know as Dracula, the legend there, the archetype there of that particular villain is he's the great seducer. He's the great seducer of women, specifically virgin women, because their blood is the purest and the prana is in the blood. The sexual force is in the blood. And so the vampire archetype seeks purity, seeks innocence, because that's the most powerful sexual force, the one that has not yet fallen, the one that is pure. There is nothing that an ego desires more than to twist, tempt, and corrupt and make fall all that is good and pure and of the light. The further we get along the path, the higher we rise, rest assured, the more the forces of darkness are going to be gathering around us like moths to a flame, trying to envelop us in darkness and make us fall. But again, it begs the question, how do we go from a mechanical AI, virus-like, single-minded, algorithm-type program to an archetype like Count Dracula, who's suave and debonair, and he has the power of speech, of seduction with his words, with his poetry, with his gallantry, with his physical presence, his intellectual presence, his emotional presence? The answer comes from the fact that an ego becomes an aggregate, psychological aggregate, becomes a empowered by virtue of the consciousness and sexual force which it is dominating. So it's not that an ego is just feeding on our sexual force. That there are other entities that do that, like for example incubi and succubi, that they're astral larvae which will feed on us while we sleep and cause us to have wet dreams, cause us to orgasm in our sleep. They'll seduce us in our sleep. They'll create visions of sexuality and whatnot, and they will cause us to lose our sexual force. And they feed on that energy, the energy that flows out. But they don't possess us. They're just like mosquitoes. They're astral larvae. They feed like a tick or like a flea or like a mosquito, but they don't become a symbiont. A symbiont is something that feeds, but a symbiont captures part of the consciousness. And the symbiont is able to now control or have some modicum of control, or at the very least, the power of suggestion, the power of creating impulses, temptations, desires, cravings, and aversions within us. And if we identify with them, we act on them in the way that the ego desires, causes us to fulfill the ego's desire, and then it gets our sexual energy and it captures the consciousness in the process. It strengthens its stranglehold on our consciousness. Every time we identify with an ego, every time we remain attached to a craving or an aversion that has been presented to us by the ego, and we say, yes, like every time we say, I am angry, I am afraid, we are creating an affirmation of a negative order, where what we're saying is, I am that ego. By saying, I am afraid, we are affirming in our consciousness, in our mind, and in our consciousness, that I am fear. I am the ego of fear. When we say, I am afraid, or I am angry, or I am horny. Now that's a lie. It's a bold-faced lie. If I look up fear in the dictionary, I am not going to see your photo. If I look up lust on Wikipedia, your picture will not be there. Even if you're a porn star, your picture is not going to be in the encyclopedia under lust. So the first thing we have to recognize about egos is egos do not tell the truth. The ego's modus operandi is deceit. Now, deceit and deception is a tricky thing. It's a subtle thing. There's deception by saying a bold-faced lie, but then there's deception by omission. And we've made a meme about this. 90% truth can kill. An ego is willing to go 90% of the way, 95, 99% of the way. Just has to leave off that 1% to make it not exactly true. The sophistication required to do this, the ability to do this, is a quality of consciousness. That level of subtlety, the level of mastery that we envision and we imagine when we look to these characters, when we look to these archetypes. The suave, the debonair, the genius, the diabolical genius of these characters, of these archetypes. And why is the Bond franchise so enduring, and so for 50 years now? Because Bond and the Bond villain are mirrors to each other. They are analogous to one another. It's like Sherlock Holmes and Moriarty. That's the archetype. That's the archetypal relationship between the Bond villain and 007. And 007, and he's not called that by accident, because the 7 deadly sins requires an agent who's 007, who works with the 7 heavens and the 7 chakras. And it's an internal battle. It's an internal fight against the 7 deadly sins. And the qualities of consciousness that our egos make use of is precisely that consciousness which they have already possessed, which they already are in possession of. This is how it is that black magicians and awakened demons and all those who walk the left-hand path have the capacity for gnosis. They know. Remember, the knowledge, the tree of knowledge of good and evil is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Da'at, gnosis. Light and dark. There's no point in being ignorant. And that is why you have Nazis in the Second World War using the swastika and the Iron Cross. And the SS use the Sig rune, because these are powerful runes. They're symbols of power. They're magical symbols. And they're symbols of power. They have tremendous power over the consciousness. They speak to our very soul, to our heart and soul. So of course the Black Lodge is going to use them. Now, in some cases, they alter them in some small way. They'll twist the swastika. They will. I'll put that back up there. They invert the pentagram, right? So the upright pentagram with the head and the arms, right? That's an upright human being. That's the right hand held on high, right? 2 fingers and a thumb. That's the upright human being. That's the upright pentagram. Whereas the inverted pentagram is an inverted human being with the legs sticking up. And that's that, and that's that. These are the horns, but it's also the 2 bottommost points of the pentagram up, and so is that. This is not just the two bottom points pointing up, but it's also the topmost point pointing down. And they say that's peace. Well, that's not peace. That's anything but peace. This is peace. Inferential peace. From my monad to your monad. From my innermost to your innermost. Peace. The upright human being. Darth Vader is a good villain to put up in this context, because the Jedi and the Sith use the same force. They use the same weapons. They use many of the same powers, including the power of suggestion, the power of a telekinesis. It's just that the Sith use the dark side of the force. Fear, anger. It makes them powerful, and they want to use the force to control the whole galaxy, to control an empire, to control all the species in the empire. That's control. And control, does anybody know what control is? Where control comes from? Because the word control does not appear in the 7 deadly sins, right? Now, you can't see the 3 in the middle, but if you know these 7 deadly sins, there is no control in the 7 deadly sins. So what's control? What is the underlying? Is it vanity? Avarice? Lust? Gluttony? Laziness? What's control? Feel free to answer in the chat if you know. And if you don't, it's no problem. But, and this might surprise you, but control is fear. It's 100% fear. The desire to control outcomes. It's 100% fear. Fear is afraid. All the control freaks in your life, you may be one of them. They're all afraid. They're terrified, in fact. They're terrified of things not working out, of things not going their way. So, what do? They scheme, they plan, they plot, they manipulate. And when things don't go their way, when people don't behave, when people don't do what they're told, they get angry. Again, we come back to a modern mythology that every Gnostic should study and meditate on, because this is a modern mythology, including the Disney sequel trilogy. Every Gnostic should be able to explain to the layperson what Star Wars really is. And the esoteric heart of Star Wars is The Empire Strikes Back. It's right smack dab in the first trilogy, and it's right in the middle of the trilogy of trilogies. Because out of the 9 films, it is well, if we're doing this math right, the 5th. There's 4 before it and 4 after it. It's right it's the heart and soul of Star Wars, and the character of Yoda is the master. And Yoda teaches us in Star Wars, fear turns to anger, anger leads to hate, and that is the path to the dark side. So, if any of you want to explore Star Wars in greater detail, we have a 2.5-hour video on the Skywalker. We call it the Skywalker Apocalypse. And apocalypse means revelation. And it's 2.5 hours because it's 9 films we have to get through. And we don't go through it scene by scene by scene by any stretch of the imagination. We try to stick to the esoteric teachings and also the meta teachings of the trilogy. And one of the things that Star Wars shows us, which is an unprecedented opportunity in our lifetime, because we can look at modern day organized religions and we can see how they've fallen. We can see how far the fruit has fallen from the tree, as it were, because all religions degenerate over time and eventually they'll disappear. And Catholicism is no exception to that rule. Neither is Islam. When you compare the Sunnis and the Shiites, compared to the mysticism of the Sufis, the original Islam, you can see this very clearly. But what's difficult to see, because it's happened hundreds of years ago or thousands of years ago, what's difficult to see are the forces at play which caused the mythology or the religion to degenerate, and the process of that, and how that happens, and how are the stages and phases, and what's going on there. Well, with Star Wars, I was 4 or 5 years old when I saw Star Wars, the original, in the movie theater, which means, and I'm just under 50 years old, which means that in one lifetime, we have before us a mythology which was born, had its golden age, and deteriorated, and in the eyes of many people fell to pieces. Certainly in the eyes of the fandom, has lost all its original meaning, all its intended meaning, all its esoteric meaning, and has now fallen into fanaticism and idolatry and politicization to a degree. And we explain all this in our Skywalker video. And this is an unprecedented opportunity in a 50-year span to see a mythology rise and then degenerate, and actually be able to put your finger on the personalities and the egos involved in that process. To be able to see how ego played into that, but then also to see how the Christ was countering that, the Logos. Because every mythology came from the Logos. Every religion was born of the Logos, born of an avatar, born of some messenger. It came through them. They were just a messenger in the same way that we're just a messenger. Here and now, sharing this with you. It's not by accident. We were speaking with a close friend last night, very, very close friend of ours, who's also on the path of the Bodhisattva. And we were speaking about the fact that Dune is coming out in October, and then in December, we have Matrix Resurrections. And many people are asking the question, did somebody ask for a 4th Matrix movie? Like, who asked for this? And that's because nobody knows what the Matrix is about. They think they know what it's about. So, what's going on here? How is it that Star Wars, which came from the Logos, and pretty clear in its teachings to a degree, much more symbolic and allegorical when we get to the rise of Skywalker, but we walk you through that in our video. What's going on here? Look to yourself. Observe yourself. Look to your own mind. Observe how the ego can rationalize every sin, every crime, every untruth, every deception, every harmful action against others and against ourselves. The mind, when it is possessed by ego, when it is in the hands of the ego, is the most dangerous, the most sophisticated, the most clever, subtle, insidious tool of the Black Lodge there is. And rationalization, the ability to reason, is how it devolves the truth into, at first, half-truths, and then later full-on deceptions, where there's very little resemblance. Now, there are specific ways in which it does that. One of the ways, and if you observe yourself, you will see this, that ego always wants to keep you focused out there. Are you feeling upset? Immediately, the ego starts scanning out there, searching for the culprit, searching for the scapegoat. So the externalized causes to blame. And all egos do this. All egos do this. And the reason why the egos do this is because they don't want you looking at them, pulling the strings, pressing the buttons, pulling the levers of our human machine, possessing us. Another way in which they do this, they have many, many tricks, but they follow laws. So, for example, the law of opposites. One of the great deceptions of ego is to turn something precisely into the opposite of the truth, to invert the truth, literally the exact opposite, and convince us that the opposite of the truth is in fact the truth. Now, where's an example of this? How about the universally accepted truism, or at least up until recently, that the physical universe was primary, that the physical universe was foundational, and that if there are other dimensions or higher dimensions or lower dimensions, they are supplemental to this world. This is the real world. Now, as esotericists, we all know that that's exactly the opposite. We are living in the matrix. This world, even the Hindus knew, they called it Maya, illusion. This world is illusory. Physical matter doesn't exist. Nikola Tesla and Walter Russell both said the universe is electric. The foundation is electricity. Well, there's no matter there. Gravity doesn't exist. Sorry, Newton. Sorry, Einstein. But Einstein's theory of relativity is entirely and wholly bogus. It's based on an incorrect fundamental assumption. It's based on a lie. You can't have a true theory that's based on an underlying assumption which is wrong. But it's so convincing, this physical reality. And our egos make it convincing. Our egos convince us of it. Our sensations, our senses, and the sensations in the body are constantly trying to reinforce this for us. We're constantly trying to be pulled back down into our lower nature, into our physical, animal, primal, lustful, desirous, fearful, envious, narcissistic selves. There are this externalization and physicalization manifests itself in an interesting way when it comes to religions and mythologies and stories. It's remarkable how, for example, Star Wars is a modern mythology. And let's say fandom in general. If you're familiar with the Comic-Con, if you're familiar with the with something called cosplay, where people go to these conventions and they dress up as their favorite characters from sci-fi and fantasy, and these people are they collect toys, They collect comic books, movies. They have every version of every movie on every format. And when they make YouTube videos, for example, these super fans, and they make videos on YouTube, they make these videos in their man caves, and they're surrounded by their collections, right? So all their toys, mint in box, all their action figures, all their comic books, all their video games, and it's all, and they have these large figures that are like $50, $60, $70 a pop. And they're full size. They're like the size of a Barbie, and they'd have Alien and Iron Man and all of these characters, and they all surround themselves. And then they talk about these things, and then they go on to these conventions, and they dress up, they cosplay. What's going on there? What is the nature of fanaticism? That's where the word fan comes from. Let's not be naive. We're not being judgmental now. We're just looking at the facts. The word fan comes from fanatic. And the word doll, i.e. action figure, doll, comes from idol. The deep, deep love, passion that these so-called fans have for their so-called properties, their so-called franchises, comes right from the deepest core of their being. It is their consciousness. It is the light. It is their innermost intimate Christ that is stimulated, that is awakened, that is burning bright and shining forth when it sees the symbols and the allegories and the archetypes that emanated from Absolute, from the seventh dimension, the first dimension of manifestation, from Keter Hokmah Binah, the Logos, and was delivered into the world through some messenger and manifested itself in comic books, in novels, in movies, in myths and legends, and certain very special video games, and Dungeons and Dragons, and these universal archetypes, and World of Warcraft, MMORPGs, which people become so fanatical about, they can lose themselves in World of Warcraft. They forget to eat, they forget to sleep, they forget to go to the bathroom 3, 4, 5 days because they're so identified with what they're doing, what they're playing. What's going on there? What's going on there is that the light of Christ, that love, that passion, which informs us, informs our innermost being with what is true and what is right and what is love, what is an expression of love, an expression of truth, an expression of severity and mercy, an expression of gnosis, self-evident experiential knowledge. But then along comes the ego, and what does it do? It wraps itself around that. It filters that, and it projects it onto the surface level. The ego blocks the conscious and the consciousness from knowing the deeper truth of the symbols and the idols and the rituals and the stories. And the ego keeps us shallow. The ego takes all that passion and all that love and all that identification with the truth and brings it from the esoteric up to the surface. We call it the exoteric. Just as the ego keeps us focused on things outside of us, always looking for something to blame, and conversely, always looking for something out there to fill the void in our heart, the fact that we're separated from ourselves, the fact that we're asleep, the fact that we don't know ourselves, the fact that we haven't achieved yug religare, union with our innermost intimate Christ. We haven't achieved that yet. So there's a separation. And in that gap, the ego says, don't worry, we'll fill that gap. Go and get a bag of Doritos. Go and watch a porn movie. Go and find another lover on the internet. Go and dress up like a god. Go and dress up like your favorite character. Go and collect. Go and buy another action figure for your collection. Go and do some drugs. Go and drink some alcohol. Go and buy another Ferrari or another mansion or another company. Go and get another $1 billion. To try to fill that gap and try to create the comfort and security that you crave, that you desire, because you're so afraid, because you are terrified. If you have read our dissertation, our 80,000 word article on the nature of fear, you will know that fear is a terrorist. Fear has the capacity to terrify us because it is a terrorist. How do terrorists operate? Does a terrorist announce himself, present himself, brandish his sword and say, "Have at you, sir, mano y mano, let us settle this once and for all"? No. A terrorist hides in the shadows. A terrorist plots. A terrorist is patient. Patience is a virtue. How is it that egos have virtues? Because of the consciousness that they possess. A terrorist is patient, methodical, careful, intelligent, and it lays traps, roadside bombs, IEDs, improvised explosive devices. Egos can improvise in any moment. How do they have that capacity? That's a capacity of consciousness. The flexibility to flow like water, to be able to adapt to any situation, any circumstance. And fear is also the great chameleon, because our article is entitled "The Many Faces of Fear." And if you just consider phobias, anxiety, depression, night sweats, terrors, stage fright, social anxiety, the fear of death, the desire for control, the desire for comfort and security. That's just a short list. Of the many faces of fear, the many ways that fear terrorizes us and possesses us. And as we said, that control, that desire to be a control freak and control outcomes and control others and get them to conform to what we want, what we desire, there's a combination, there's one or two things going on there, or there's a tag team, a double thing going on. There's lust, which is desire itself, and then there's fear, the desire to control, the desire to control outcomes. I'm afraid of negative outcomes. I don't want XYZ. I'm afraid of this, that, or the other thing happening, so I'm going to do what must be done to create the outcome that I want. Fear and lust are the two major egos that we have to deal with. They're the most powerful egos that we have to deal with, and but there's a third ego, and this maybe we'll leave some of the stories and case studies a little bit later, because to start sort of showing or illustrating some of these subtleties. Because we spent, the reason why we picked this topic today was not least because it's important, but because we were on the phone for 4 hours with someone yesterday. And it's someone who we know very well. And this individual began the conversation with us. Very soon into the conversation, we were talking about how he knows there's still something haunting him, but he hasn't been able to put his finger on what it is. And as we were attempting to take him through a process of sort of self-psychoanalysis, if that's the right expression, we often do this with individuals. We can see what's haunting them. We can see what's possessing them. We can hear it in their words. We can feel it in their energy, and we can see it. It's telltale signs. It's telltale patterns in the pattern of their speech, in the pattern of their reactions to what we say. And there's a way of provoking an individual where their true colors come out, and they will say that no, I'm responding to you, but you know they're reacting. And it's a very delicate dance. It's a very delicate process of teasing the ego out of them to the surface, and then slowly and gently revealing to the individual, having them look and listen. What did you just say there? Why did you say that? Why did you say it that way? And for the past how many minutes, you've been evading this, and you've been trying to convince me of that. And why are you trying to control my opinion or of you, or what I believe about the situation? Why are you trying to, why are you doing this right now? Long story short, he admitted by the end of the conversation, a good 3 hours into the conversation, he had admitted to us and himself that not only was he a chameleon, he had identified and taken on the properties of fear, the great chameleon. He also admitted to us that for the longest time, he had night terrors, nightmares of certain scenarios, that he chose his entire vocation and his career, his vocation as in order to avoid the scenarios that were presented to him in his nightmares. And it was gratifying in a way to finally make a breakthrough and see him make a breakthrough for himself. But it was a 3.5 hour process to get there. And it was like hunting we could try to find the right analogy here. It was hunting a demon in the dark. It was like, it's like just when you think you've got him, poof, he's gone. He's gone someplace else, and he's gone over here, and he's gone over there, and he's changed this, and now he's this, and now he's that. But because we're experts on fear, we know fear intimately. The demon of fear can't hide from us. And we testify why that's so in that article that we wrote, The Many Faces of Fear. We've spent a lifetime being haunted by and sparring with and dueling with a very, very, very powerful demon of fear that's inside of us. So we have the experiential knowledge of this, right? It's like we consider ourselves to be a big game hunter when it comes to fear. And we know that we took on that burden in this lifetime. Just look around the world. Look around the world we live. Look at the whole COVIDiocy. And try to convince yourself that that is not an exercise in fear. That it is not fear that has gripped everyone, including the global elite, which is why they're so adamant and so desperate to squeeze like a vice grip control over this humanity and over this planet. But we mentioned this phone call, we mentioned this process with this individual who, by the way, is a good 15 years older than us, thinks of himself as our mentor, and we finally got him to open up and admit to himself and admit to us the truth. And he finally realizes how he had been evading it and how he had been cleverly rationalizing how he's the chameleon and so on and so forth. And meanwhile, the whole time, fear had wormed its way into multiple different aspects of his life and the way he is, like a tapeworm in the intestines. And even though he's fearless, he's not afraid of anything. But his fear had morphed to 99.9% control. But the thing about it is that if you're intimate with fear, if you know fear, and if you know control is fear, then you can see through the control, and all you see is the fear. All you see is the tapeworm. You can see through the actions of the zombie, the actions of the possessed one. You can see right through their actions and see into the heart of the symbiont, the entity that is behind those actions and behind those words and behind those attitudes and evasions and rationalizations and convincations. Is that a word? Did we just make that up? Convincing, the sales job. When someone is selling you something, and you know you're being sold something, right? It's like they want you to, they want to control you. They want to control your actions. They want you to buy what they're selling. And so there's always that icky feeling, right? Like when any sort of plaid suit wearing salesman is doing his thing, or any of those television salespeople, those infomercial people are doing their thing, or even a lawyer, for example, a lawyer making their case in court, but they're defending someone who's clearly guilty, but the defense lawyers, silver forked tongue, but silver tipped forked tongue, and he can wax poetic, right? All the reasons why his client couldn't possibly have done this, that, or the other thing. Oh, we appeal to you, jury, to your humanity. Don't commit this terrible mistake of convicting my client. He's a salesman. He's a well-educated salesman. Silver-tongued, forked-tongued salesman. Silver-tipped, forked-tongued salesman. But he's a salesman. The being isn't selling anything to anybody. The logos doesn't sell anything to anybody. The light shines. The light shines. And by virtue of the truth and the light that shines forth attraction. There's only two forces in the universe: radiation and magnetism. And this is a powerful tool for discernment when you're dealing with someone. That doesn't mean, now this is where it gets dicey and dangerous, and because many of us are bottled up inside of ego. And the younger we are, the more likely it is that we are very adamant and passionate. And we know what we know, but it's sort of like this desperation grabs hold of us. I got to get this person to understand. I got to get this person to understand me. Like, for example, a family member. How many of us live in families where we're the black sheep? How many of us are the enigma? We are the misunderstood and unintelligible, and we are judged for being different. We are judged for the path that we are walking. We're judged for doing things differently than everybody else. And we're the black sheep, we're the outcast, the loner, the lone wolf. I mean, there's so many different ways to express it. And how many of us feel that? And then how many of us really, really desperately want to be understood by maybe not everybody in our family, but at least, you know, our mother or our father or a sibling, or perhaps a spouse, a partner, a best friend who and that desperation, that desire to be understood, to be accepted, that, dear brothers and sisters, is the ego of fear. Rest assured, it is the ego of fear, and it is stimulated because here's the other thing about egos. When our loved one, a family member, father, mother, sibling, you name it, but particularly mothers and fathers, try to impose their will upon us, try to control us, control our life, control our choices and our directions. And we react badly to that. We don't want to be controlled. And we get standoffish, or in some cases, in our personal case now, okay, we freely admit that the most raucous, rip-roaring, shouting matches that were ever in our household growing up were the ones with our father about our choices in life. Because we knew deep down, we didn't know exactly, we couldn't say verbatim, but it was just the intuition, the knowing, but the knowing was just here and here in the gut. It wasn't here yet. It wasn't here yet. We were nowhere near that developed yet. We were just a kid. We were just a punk. But that fire, the fire of fires and the light of lights was inside of us. And there was no way we were going to bow down and compromise our integrity. Integrity, that which is integral to our being. That which is our being and the being of our being, our reason for being. There was no way we were going to let anybody stand in the way of what we were here to do. But unfortunately, the desire to control is fear. And ego begets ego. Everything is energy, everything is sound, everything is vibration. And like begets like. Number one, like attracts like. If you've watched some of our previous live streams, you know about the Tao, you know about the Tao, how the Tao comes into being. And we know that like attracts like. That's magnetism. It's not opposites attract. It's like attracts like. Opposites repel one another. If opposites didn't repel one another, the Tao could not exist. Nothing could be separated if opposites attracted. Like attracts like, opposites repel. So when fear radiates out on a vibrational frequency, and our family members are part of our soul family, we share common vibrational frequencies in our makeup, in our karmic makeup, our metaphysical physiognomy. We share those same vibrational frequencies. Where many times we're members of the same ray, if that's the way you want to visualize it or interpret it. And so when they vibrate through a certain type of ego, it's like a tuning fork. It's like hitting a tuning fork or playing a note on one instrument, and then the exact same note vibrates on the harp or the guitar string or the piano. Because as the vibrations hit, they cause the other one to vibrate. So when someone comes at us wanting to control us, they're coming from a place of fear. So what's that going to stimulate? What's that going to activate within us? But our fear. Now, fear wants to be in control. So all of a sudden, you have this person trying to control us, but this fear wants to be in control. Now we're going to butt heads. And what do we know from Master Yoda in Star Wars? Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate. Those arguments that we had with our father brought the house down. Brought the house down. And we were to blame. Why were we to blame? We were to blame because our father was there to teach us. He was just mirroring our fear. We were born into this household for a reason. We were born with a family that we had for a reason. We didn't understand it at the time. We didn't see it at the time. We know that now. Now, we speak openly and freely with our Father about who we are, what we are, our mission, and everything about it. We no longer fight about anything anymore. He knows, he recognizes, he sees now. But the only reason we could reach that breakthrough with our Father is when we let go of our attachment to our fear and our need to control. We were the ones who were in need of controlling. And what were we trying to control? Our Father. Yes, it's true. When someone is trying to control us and we react to that, and when we reach out in desperation, desperately wanting to be understood, desperately wanting for that person to see us for who we are and what we are trying to control them. The more we want to be accepted, the more we care about what other people think about us, anybody, including the people who are so-called closest to us, we are gripped by fear. Fear is the opposite of patience. Fear is the opposite of love. Fear is the opposite of courage, obviously. Fear is the opposite of being. Lust is the opposite of love, but also too is fear. You put that in there. lust and fear are and fear is so subtle. That desire to be understood, the desire to be heard, the desire to be seen, the desire to not be misunderstood, the desperation to desperately try to get this person to see, to understand, that's fear. That is fear. You might have the best of intentions deep down in your heart. You want the world to see your light. You want the world to accept that you are here on to do some work, to do a work of sacrifice and suffering for humanity. And the people around you, your friends who all have cars and houses and spouses and everything else, and all the trappings of a material success, and they're happy and they're taking trips and they have kids and they have and they have all these wonderful things. And where are we? And then we get judged on where we are, which is often nowhere, if we are walking the path of the Bodhisattva, or if we are walking perhaps a lesser path. Not everyone is here, walking not everyone is here to climb all three mountains. Maybe you're just climbing the first mountain. Maybe you just seek awakening and self-realization, just mastery. Maybe that's all you're here to do. That is plenty hard enough. And if you're walking that path, then you have plenty hardship and suffering enough, and you have had to make many, 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 many sacrifices on that path up that mountain. And the people around you who are not following, or are not on that path, or nowhere near that path, or nowhere near the mountain, they don't get it. And they won't get it unless you let go of your need for them to get it. Live and let live. It is what it is. I am that I am. You are what you are. God be praised. And it's fine. I don't need you to believe me. What good would it do? What good would it do for me to fill your head with all kinds of stuff about I'm this and I'm that and blah, 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 blah? What difference does it make? It makes no difference in my path, my journey, whether I fill your head with a bunch of beliefs. Why? So you can go and brag to your friends that, my son's a bodhisattva, when they don't even know what that means. And the people they're bragging to won't know what the hell that means. They'll think that your parents have gone off the deep end. So, and it was when we comprehended this and awoke to this and recognized that our Father was trying to control us this whole time because we were the instigators. We were the ones trying to control him, trying to change his view of us, trying to change his opinion of us, trying to change his philosophy of life, which is very materialistic, very pragmatic. He's a Hungarian immigrant, for God's sakes. How could he have been anything other than what he is, to give us the foundation and the possibility and the opportunity that we had to be able to do what we do, and to give us the upbringing to be raised the way we were raised. So in making that comprehension and letting it go and saying, you know what, it's fine. And all of a sudden, now, all the animosity and any sort of frustration and resentment that we were harboring toward our Father was replaced with love and loving compassion and recognition that and that he's actually, and more compassion towards the suffering of him, recently having lost his wife. That's our mother. And also recognizing how how difficult it must be for a parent to watch their child walk the path of the bodhisattva, a path of suffering and sacrifice for humanity. Just imagine how terribly difficult that is for a parent. Just imagine what it was like for Mary to watch her son nailed to the cross. Can you even begin to fathom what that must have been like? And how desperate? We don't hear a lot about Jesus's father, Joseph. But one can imagine that Joseph was desperate for Jesus to take on the family business and be a carpenter. Anything but do what he came here to do, which is die for humanity. So let's be compassionate. Let's be understanding of those who are not on this path, who are not at this level, and who can't grasp why anybody would want to do what we're doing, and why anybody would choose such a difficult, challenging, or painful path. When these people, they just want what's best for us. They want us to be comfortable and secure and safe. That's what parents want. That's what siblings want, for the most part. The people who care about us, they can only care about us at the level that they're at. So let us dig deeper within ourselves and care about them at a higher level than what they are capable of. And then our light will shine, and they will come to us of their own accord. And they will abandon all thoughts of control, and they will abandon their need to have us conform, because they will see that light emanating from us, and they will say, you know what? I don't know why, but I have a new respect for you. I have a newfound, I don't know what it is, but I just, for whatever reason, I've just decided that I'm going to let you do what you need to do, and I'm going to stay out of it. I'm going to support you, or I'm going to, whatever. I may not like what you're doing, but I'm not going to stand in the way of it, and I'm not going to try to convince you to take the path. That's what my father did. When I let go of the need to control him, he stopped trying to control me. And this is how I knew that I was the instigator, that I was the problem the whole time. And I lived an entire life blaming him and being frustrated, because that's ego. That's the terrorist. The terrorist creates the false flag operation and then points the finger, saying, look, it was Osama bin Laden. Look, we got to go to Afghanistan. We got to bomb them. Fear and control. And it's so subtle. And then the self-righteousness, the vanity, right? The pride and everything. It's all starts getting wrapped up in this. Like, I'm the victim mentality. The victim mentality. Let's put up let's put up the universe's biggest victim. Have you seen Infinity War? Avengers Infinity War? Gerard, you are not stupid, my friend. You're not stupid. You're not stupid. Let us have some compassion for ourselves. We are walking a path which is difficult. And we are facing an adversary which is a master of deception, a master of disguise, a master of misdirection. They're called black magicians because they're magicians. They're tricksters. They hypnotize. They mess with us. They play with us. And it is a game. If you've ever played chess against an opponent who was equally matched to you, you know you've got a 50-50 chance of losing. And at any given moment, that opponent might pull a brilliancy out of the air and catch you off guard. But it's not because you're stupid. If you're fighting an opponent on equal ground, on equal footing, you're fighting a skilled adversary who knows you, and in many ways knows you better than you know yourself. Do not be surprised. Do not be surprised that you've had the wool pulled over your eyes, or you've been living a lie, or you've been fooling yourself or kidding yourself. You have been had, you have been possessed, you have been hypnotized, you have been tricked. And that's why it's not enough to be mindful in sort of a blasé kind of general way. We have to develop a consciousness which is sharp like a scalpel. We need to be able to contemplate and meditate on what we observe, on ourselves, on the dynamics and relationships we have with others. This is what Master Samael referred to as the great gymnasium of life. You can go to the top of a mountain or into a cave and cloister yourself off from the world and take a vow of silence and go on a some kind of extreme fasting diet and perform all sorts of these asceticisms, ascetic behaviors, ascetic practices, and become a yogi like all those yogis in India, and get nowhere, and get absolutely nowhere, because you don't have the gymnasium, you don't have the gym, you don't have the sparring arena, you don't have the chessboard with opponents coming to challenge you, to show you where your weaknesses lie. Because like attracts like, we attract those who have the same egos and similar frequencies vibrating, and same egos at similar levels, similar frequencies, similar tendencies, similar personalities, or even if their personalities are a little different, the egos are, we always attract into our life that which we need. That which we need. That's what the real law of attraction is about. You may be aware of this little thing in the New Age known as The Secret. This little practice called manifesting your desires and harnessing the power of the law of attraction. 100% ego, 100% black magic. Since when is life about attracting what you want? Who wants? What wants? What do you want? You want a Ferrari? Do you think your being is telling you to do black magic because your being needs a Ferrari? What does your being need a Ferrari for? Unless your purpose in life is to be a race car driver, but guess what? If your purpose in life is to be a race car driver, a Ferrari will be given to you. A Ferrari will show up with a roll cage and sponsors slapped on the side. And someone will say, hey, why don't you get inside this gigantic gas tank with wheels and go and risk your life? If that's what you're here to do. That's what will happen. Everything that you need to do what you came here to do will show up. But if you just want it because you want it, and you're going to manipulate the law of attraction to get it, that's 100% ego. That's 100% black magic. What is it you suppose you're strengthening by doing that? You think you're becoming more spiritual? You think you're becoming a master? This is, and in light of that, just look at how the New Age has been played like a harp from hell. And we're going to shift now a little bit away from fear, but it's probably going to come up again, because let's face it, fear is, I mean, gluttony and laziness, yeah, I mean, they're problematic, of course. Envy is, you know, these egos also have their subtleties, but really, on a scale of things, envy and laziness, or sorry, envy and laziness and gluttony, these are lower hierarchical egos. These are things which people at lower levels suffer from and need to deal with more. I mean, we all have to deal with gluttony, or, you know, to a certain degree. We all have to deal with envy to a certain degree. But really, when you look at, for example, the standard American diet, and you look at the obesity rates in the United States, and you see how obesity is this massive problem, health crisis in the United States, and you see the level of those people, you know that gluttony only really has the power over lower level individuals. And we're not trying to be judgmental here. Everybody has a different level of being. You know, this is work that takes many lifetimes, and each time we're trying to, you know, work our way on the scales of evolution. And so any of us who are dealing with, the reason why we focus on fear is because gluttony is relatively easy to deal with and cope with. And besides which, if you go into gluttony, if you go into laziness, if you go into vanity, narcissism, if you go into some of these things, envy, oftentimes you find there's actually other egos, more powerful egos at play. Many Gnostics oh yes, Ryu Kami makes a good point. And this is what we're about to say. Like, we also have challenges with gluttony, no questions, right? We like Ryu mentions here, we have an ice cream habit, a Doritos addiction, if that's the right word for that. But just like most people, if you open up a bag and you have one Dorito and you're sitting in front of the TV, there's a very good possibility that you're not going to stop eating those Doritos until the bag is empty. They're engineered that way. The science of the food, the additives in it are that way. All the MSG, all this stuff, it's stimulating the hypothalamus in the brain. It's creating an opiate effect. Same with ice cream, with the dairy and everything else, and the sugar and everything else. But for Gnostics, for Gnostics, gluttony is very often a proxy for lust. Because if we're practicing white tantra, if we're practicing transmutation, and we are not indulging lust, gluttony and lust are very closely related. And all you have to do is look at pornography and look at the obsession that people have with oral sex. The mouth is a very sexual organ. And the sexual energy wants to flow. And if lust can't get what it wants by getting us to orgasm, by emptying us, it's going to get what it wants by filling us up, by making us feel full. That feeling, we've talked about this before, that egos want us to feel empty or want us to feel full. This is including psychologically and emotionally, as well as physiologically and metaphysically, energy-wise. So what is narcissism and pride if not feeling full of oneself, right? Pumping out your chest and beaming with pride and, oh, look at me, or the narcissist, right? Oh, you know, look at me. It's so full of themselves, right? But then there's the flip side of pride, which is shame, which is feeling empty inside and hating yourself. It's self-loathing. It's like Gollum and Smeagol, right? Well, yeah, it's Gollum and Smeagol, the way Gollum torments Smeagol, right? You know, you a murderer, and all the rest of it, right? We're not going to try to act it out. Oh yeah, very good point. Food porn is big now. Even all those, you know, do you know anybody who calls himself a foodie? Have you gone to any of those fairs and those food trucks? We have one here in Toronto, the International Exhibition. They call it the X every fall, and then they have this entire alley, this roadway that's just lined on both sides with food trucks, and these food trucks every year they compete with one another with what kind of over the top flavor extravaganzas they can create. So these are the places where they started out, you know, doing the deep fried O. Henry bars, and they do these like hamburgers that now have a burger and then bacon and then, you know, all these like cheese and then like all of these different toppings. You end up with a burger like this with all these different toppings, and there's Doritos in there and chips in there, and I don't even know what else they put in there. Then they batter the whole thing. They put on a stick, they batter the whole thing, and then they deep fry it. It's just completely over the top gluttony, but it's food porn, exactly as C-Cat calls it. And so there are ways in which one ego, and lust can do this because lust is the mother of all egos, right? Desire. So gluttony, the craving for fullness, right? The craving for food, that's just lust going through that matrix and with that disguise. And so we were talking about the New Age. Yeah, that's right. That burger needs ice cream and Doritos. Well, they have deep fried ice cream, right? And they have stuff that they have recipe. You can go on YouTube and find recipes for fried chicken and stuff that uses Dorito crumbs instead of breadcrumbs. And you, like, instead of cornmeal or whatever certain thing, you crush Doritos and you roll the thing in Doritos and stuff. It's out there. And the internet, which is of course a macrocosmic expression of the subconscious, the collective unconscious subconscious of humanity, it's all out there. You can find it all. Every desire, every what's the word we're looking for? It's deeper than desire. Fetish. Every fetish. And it is fetishism, right? We are talking about eroticism, right? Erotic doesn't only refer to sexuality, by the way. Eroticism, Eros is the god of love, but it's the original meaning of erotic refers to the love of sensory pleasures, indulgence, right? So the eroticism of being a foodie, of the pleasure that comes from food. And we're not talking about eating something and registering, oh yeah, that tastes good, I enjoyed that. That's fine. We're not talking about that. We're talking about that eating with, there's two things, either the complete mindlessness of it, being completely hypnotized and zombie-like, eating in front of the TV, and then there's that other aspect of like the indulgence of it and the decadence of it and the identification and attachment to it, and really allowing yourself to be drawn into and consumed by the experience, such that not long after having the experience, you're craving the experience again. You want to go back. How often have you heard that? Someone goes to comes back from a restaurant, whatever, and go, oh, I can't wait to go back. They come back from a vacation. Oh, I can't wait to get back there. By far, the most amazing 10 months of our life was in Japan. And people have asked us, well, why don't you go back? Do you want to go back? Have you been back? I say no. We recently, not too long ago, we were in Spain. Oh, we didn't explore the whole country. We went to Valencia and we saw some things, but then we went to Barcelona and we saw La Sagrada Familia. And we don't plan on going back to Spain anytime soon. Why? It's despite the fact that La Sagrada Familia was on our, quote, bucket list of things to see in person, in the flesh, and it is truly remarkable. It will be for this humanity the beacon that it is intended to be. And the way it was designed and constructed by Gaudi, we could do a 3-hour live stream on La Sagrada, and perhaps we will. We have enough photos. We have enough information. We spent 2 days at La Sagrada Familia. 1 day outside and 1 day inside. And there's that much to see and there's that much to experience. And we spent a good 2 hours in meditation during that time, inside. It is an absolute marvel of esoteric architecture, design, and engineering. It is a truly modern marvel. Is it on the scope of, the Great Pyramid of Giza or, some of these things? You'll have to judge that for yourself. We're not here to compare apples and oranges, because it really is apples and oranges. But in terms of a monument to the Holy Family, the Holy Trinity, Keter Hokmah Binah, the masculine, feminine, and union of masculine, feminine. It is not the work of one man's ego. Let's put it that way. Its majesty, its enormity, it is divinely inspired, and it inspired the entire, not just city of Barcelona, but the entire region of Catalonia, because Catalonia wasn't always a part of Spain. It's a different culture. It's a different There's a different energy there. There's a different vibe. And the whole of Catalonia has taken on this project now to complete this project, Gaudi's vision. And they see it as a vision. They know it's a vision. They know it's from God. And they are going to complete it, come hell or high water. So take that for what it's worth. So you can tell, like, we're not talking about the Burj Dubai here. You can go to Dubai and see the good night, Kami. Thank you for, Ryu. Thank you for joining us. You can go to Dubai and you can see the Burj Dubai, the world's tallest building. And it's just this colossal glass phallic symbol. And you know that it's just ego. It's not divinely inspired. Or their Palm Islands or their World Islands and all the ridiculous amounts of money that they're spending on just decadence and self-indulgence. And then you experience, you see it in person, La Sagrada Familia, and you say to yourself, this is not an ego project. This is not ego masturbation. Every nook and cranny, everywhere you look and turn, there is divine engineering, divine aesthetics, divine storytelling and allegory, and it's all perfectly harmonized. It's come together. And so as much as the world out there is an expression and a reflection of our world in here, we can learn from the phenomenon, from the people, and from the things out there. We can learn a great deal about the nature of the being, of the light, of consciousness, of truth, and the nature of ego. Because everything out there in the world that people complain about, and they say is the cause of their suffering, all of that is caused by ego. Ego is behind all of it. And it's all there to teach us. And it's all there to guide us. And what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. The problem is we have pride, and we have the singular ego of the I, the false self, the shadow self. It's interesting because when Carl Jung talks about integration of the shadow self, he was coming at it from a perspective of someone who is awake. The difficulty with the line integration of the shadow self said to someone who's still asleep, they are the shadow self. The shadow self wholly possesses them. In other words, they've fully integrated the shadow self, but in the wrong way. The shadow self has integrated them. The shadow self has possessed them. Those people have to be awakened to the disintegration of the shadow self, the disintegration of the ego. They're already possessed. See, they're here and the ego's here, and it's like this. How do you flip that around? You have to break this up first. And then you can observe and comprehend and integrate. And then you are in control. You are the master again. But if your shadow self is master of you, what is there to integrate? This is subtle, or perhaps not so subtle. If you really, to us, it's not subtle. But then perhaps to someone who's not familiar with this work, maybe they do find this like splitting hairs. So one of the problems with what we just described there, and being possessed by ego, and by fear, and by lust, and by our other egos, one of the other big three egos that we have to face is pride. Pride, and the flip side of pride, which is shame. And in our case, in the case of those on a spiritual path, the form that this pride takes, first and foremost, is mystic pride. That's the pride that whispers to us, oh, you're awake already. You're a master already. You're one with the universe already. You have this initiation or that initiation, or if you've achieved this level or that level, or you don't have to meditate because you meditate all the time. You meditate 24 hours a day. You don't have to go into meditation. You everything you do is a meditation, or any number of other lies that mystic pride tells us and convinces us of, because of course we want to hear it. We want to believe it. And the New Age bookstores are literally chock full of how-to guides, how to be completely and utterly possessed by mystic pride. Cover to cover, they are how-to guides, manuals. Now, they don't obviously sell themselves like that, but they are. The notion, for example, affirmations. The notion that you can use affirmations to awaken. If we use this analogy, if you are here and you're not yet awake, that means you're asleep and your ego has you. You are your ego. You are your shadow self. The I that you identify with is not your true self. The I that you're identifying with is your false self. So if you start making affirmations as your false self, what do you think you're doing but feeding mystic pride? I am unlimited abundance. I am the highest good. I am light. I am God. I am this. I am that. I. Where's the humility? You're never going to be that. You're never going to be that. You and I are vessels, we're vehicles, we're flesh and bone, three-dimensional spacesuits. We're characters in a video game. But if we're identified with a character in the video game and we spend all our time doing affirmations, all we're doing is strengthening our identification and attachment to the character in the video game and believing that this character has the potential to live outside the video game. That's insane. That's insanity. No character of a video game can live outside of the video game. That's just a fact. So mystic pride is that clever, subtle, but oh so effective ego that gets into our headspace and into our heart and gets between us and our innermost being and pretends to be our being. And if you really observe yourself, you can see this happening inside of you. For example, if you fall into indulgence of another ego, let's say you lose your temper in an argument, and afterwards you're saying to yourself, oh, what possessed me to do that? Or you feel bad about it afterwards. You feel regret, and you feel ashamed. And then this voice comes in your head and says, you shouldn't have done that. That wasn't very spiritual of you. What would Buddha say? What would God say? What would Jesus say? What would Jesus do? And then you start thinking thoughts, and then you have this other part of your mind that starts commenting on the thoughts that you're thinking. And you realize, and you might think, you might believe that you're being chastised or being given guidance by your innermost being on your bad behavior, because it's giving you moralizations, it's giving you lectures on ethics, so what you should have done, what you shouldn't have done. Maybe you should apologize. You're obviously not as advanced as you thought you were. You're not as awake as you thought you were, because if you were, you wouldn't have lost your temper, blah, 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 and on and on and on it goes. And that shame, that voice of shame, that voice of judgment inside of you, what did we say about the nature of shame? What is shame? Shame is pride. The ego of pride doesn't care if you're praising yourself, if you love yourself too much, or if you're judging yourself and you hate yourself and you're blaming yourself and you're being hard on yourself. That's pride. It doesn't care. As long as you're narcissistic and focused, as long as you're vain and narcissistic and focused on yourself. Me, 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 me. But these voices in your head, they're very convincing. And they can say things that seem downright rational, perfectly logical, perfectly sane things. Oh, maybe you should apologize. Maybe you should write them a nice email. Maybe you shouldn't do this next time. Maybe next time you should do this, that, the other thing. And then you read all these new age books and whatever telling you this and telling you that. Maybe you should go and do 100 affirmations. I am perfect peace and harmony. I am perfect peace and harmony. I can control myself when I am triggered. I have perfect control over myself while I'm triggered. And who told you to do those affirmations? That voice of shame, which is mystic pride. Because after you do 100 affirmations, and now the only thing that's in your mind is, oh, I am so this, and I am so that, and I'm so spiritual, and I've overcome this now. And oh boy, I can't wait till the next person tries to trigger me and tries to gaslight me. I'll show them I've done 100 affirmations. Took me an hour. Mystic pride. It's just pride. Playing us like a harp from hell. Pride taking control of us, the character in the video game, getting between us and our innermost player, who is the one who really should be controlling us, whose will and commands are the ones that keep us on the straight and narrow, on the razor's edge. Pride, fear, lust, these are the big three that we need to look out for on the path. And lust may be the mother of all egos, but fear and pride, they are close behind. So just observe where others might be coming from and let things go, maybe. This is getting into the topic of transformation of impressions, where no, it's not just that, CCAT. Observe where others might be coming from and simultaneously observe what is being triggered inside of you. What is the automatic reaction that is coming up, bubbling up inside of you to react to them? Recognize what's inside of you and see if you can feel into what's inside of them. Because chances are what's bubbling up inside of you is being triggered and empowered by the energy that they're sending your way. So it's very likely they're in the same frequency and in that moment in the same ego. And so if you think they're being controlling, like we talked about earlier, and you're going to react to them, don't tell me what to do, right? I'm the boss of me. Then you're also in control. And not only that, if you're telling them to stop trying to control you, you're trying to control them. So what you want to do is recognize that, see that, and say, aha, there's my fear. There's my need to be in control. There's my need to control outcomes and my need to manipulate and control other people. And that other person is trying to manipulate and control me because I have the tendency to do that with others. And they're showing me that. They're mirroring that to me. So now I see that. And okay, I'm going to let it go. I'm going to transform that impression into gnosis, into knowledge. You see what's playing out. And you see through it to the underlying ego. It's not enough to say, oh, that person's trying to control me. Okay, fine, I'll let it go. You see, that's not enough. Because unless you make the connection consciously between them trying to control you and your own fear trying to control them that attracted the energy of that circumstance, that interaction, you're not going to benefit from any learning, any knowledge, and you're not going to accumulate any gnosis with which you might be able to ultimately accumulate enough gnosis to comprehend the nature of your fear and how clever and how insidious it is and how subtle it is. It's not so simple. This is not a simple, you can't let go of egos. We've said this so many times. You can't let go of an ego any more than you can let go of an Alabama tick. They are not to be let go of. You can let go of your identification and attachment to ego. But that's just the first step in the transformation of impressions, of stop indulging and stop feeding those egos. That's just the first step. But egos do not go quietly into the night. They do not. They do not. They will not. And this dynamic that we're describing is no more evidenced than in romantic relationships. The way in which our egos literally screw with us when we are with our romantic partner. In other words, a partner with which we share a very high degree of sexual chemistry. The sexual force in them vibrates at the same frequency as our own. And those sexual forces, those sexual energies, they want to do what the sexual energy does. They want to flow. They want to make sparks. They want to create. And they want to make fire. And if it's not sparks in the bedroom, it's sparks in the kitchen. That's the way it is. If our lust, our desire, if it's not screwing with us in bed, then it's going to see to it that we're screwing our partner or they're trying to screw us over in the kitchen in any number of ways. And, you know, we don't have to get into detailed case studies here because we're presuming that everybody listening has had a relationship of some kind or another, a romantic relationship. And you know the insane things that you can get into an argument about and fight over. And perhaps you've seen it with your parents. If you've had parents that fought like cats and dogs all the time over the stupidest things, or every little thing could be an argument. That's because the sexual energy wants to flow between two people, and it's constantly triggering. The sexual energy is constantly igniting within one another in such a relationship. So you ignite the fire. The flame's got to go somewhere, right? And it wants to, and it wants to, and the egos want that fire. They want that energy. So if lust can't get it to flow down and out through the orgasm, then it's going to take you in the downward spiral of an argument and fight and fight and fight and fight and fight and fight and fight. And interestingly enough, maybe you've experienced this as well. If you've ever experienced make-up sex, where after a rip-roaring argument and fighting and shouting and screaming and all this kind of stuff, you're like, it's like all foreplay. Because as you go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, it's like lust working you up and getting your engine revved up and getting you in the mood to expel your sexual force. So then after a good rip-roaring argument, you go and you have make-up sex. And then lust gets what it wanted from the beginning, which is your sexual force. You go have make-up sex, you have an orgasm, now lust is full. And you're empty. You've been emptied. Yeah, so literally trying to control how one another drives, questioning every habit, fighting like cats and dogs, right? This is not an uncommon experience, which is why we don't have to get into the details. You know this. All what we're here to do is help shed light on what is going on energetically and dynamically beneath the surface and behind the curtain. Egos want our sexual force, and they want to possess us. They want to possess our consciousness. They want more of our consciousness. The more consciousness they have, the more clever and subtle and insidious they can be. And the more the sexual energy they get, the more empowered, the more they can duplicate their psychological aggregates, and they become more powerful. They grow, they evolve, they become more powerful. And there is a esoteric term known as hasnamusen, which is someone who has a dual center of gravity. That is someone who has awakened their consciousness, but their consciousness is also awake inside of their ego. And they're dual personality. They're a hasnamusen. They are at once, they have a dual center of gravity. They can shift from being perfectly holy and spiritual and sacrificial and then on a dime they can switch and become a diabolical, sinister, insidious, indifferent, heartless, selfish, narcissistic demon. It's an angel and a demon simultaneously in one body. Now we know what we're talking about here, right? Because we've seen it in ourselves. We are, well, we've admitted, we've said that we're possessed by a demon. And we have experienced what that's like. The difference is that we're not a wholehearted Hasnamusin. We're not awakened in our demon. We're awake. We just still live with the demon, which we've been struggling with. But we know a little bit about what that's like, because number one, we have seizures. The demon possesses us in that way. But also, secondly, we know what depression is like, and we know what we are possessed by, that anger. When that depression, when that desire to control comes to the surface, like when we had those fights with our dad. And we also know how close we are. We were warned. The line that separates Christ from Antichrist is a hairline, and we were warned in Japan through an experience that we had there, just how close we are to becoming a Hasnamusin, or worse, worse than someone with a dual center of gravity, someone with 100% center of gravity in the dark side, in the left-hand path. So many of the practices that are encouraged by the New Age will lead to awakening within the shadow self. Awakening the shadow self. In other words, awakening as a black magician, awakening as a demon. And the manifesting your desires is just one aspect. When they get into deeper versions of this, the black tantra is the real kicker. When all those New Age books that teach so-called tantra, if the word white is not in front of the word tantra, it is black tantra. Period. No discussion, no argument, no nothing. The path of the razor's edge is what it is. The energy must... Let us, for a brief aside, why does the ego want the sexual force that much? But not just because it's the creative force of the universe. Let us understand and comprehend what the sexual force is. Why are all the egos, or all the sins in the background here and in the thumbnail to this video, why are they all women? Are we a misogynist? Are we a patriarchal misogynist who hates women? Why are they all women? They're all women because the Divine Mother Kundalini, the sexual force, is feminine. The creative force of the universe is feminine. Everything is born of the mother. That is, in manifest reality, everything is born of the feminine. And the egos desire that energy, and they tempt and seduce us through the sexual force, through the Kunda buffer organ. They crystallize the Kunda buffer organ. If the Kundalini rises from the root chakra up the spinal column to the crown chakra, the Kunda buffer organ falls from the root chakra downward, and that's the symbolic tail of Satan, all those devils and demons. The tail that points down and even has an arrowhead on the bottom of the tail pointing down. That's where we get the expression down and out. You know what it means to be down and out? A homeless person, a drug addict, living on the streets, living in the gutter, they're down and out. That's the expression comes from the down and out flow of the sexual force. That's what the egos desire. So every teaching, every school that suggests that there is power in the orgasm and spiritual power in the orgasm, and how to direct spiritual energy, and they teach you how to have orgasms in different parts of your body and create euphoria and create samadhi and create ecstasy by having the orgasm in your head, in your heart. They're teaching you Black Tantra. They're teaching you how to become an awakened demon. Because the transmutation of the sexual force, white Tantra, sexual alchemy, the raising of the Divine Mother Kundalini up the spinal column to the crown chakra, where she unites in Immaculate Conception with her husband, the Holy Spirit. The fires of the Divine Feminine unite with the fires of the Divine Masculine to give rise to the fire of the fires and the light of lights of the cosmic Christ. The Christ child. Father and mother and child. The child is the Christ, the divine androgen. Divine masculine, divine feminine. Union. Fusion. You get a star. The heart of every star is fusion energy. And out of that fusion comes radiation. The light radiates out of that fusion. But the ego is so clever and it's so subtle. And these people with their teachings and polyamorism and group sex and cult sex and these cult leaders like Osho, to this day he has followers. To this day there are people who worship and idolize Osho. Osho, who when he's finally shuffled off this mortal coil, he went to prison and the whole rest of his story, he had something like 27 Rolls Royces. What does a spiritual guru need with 27 Rolls Royces? What does that not strike anybody as a little bit of a red flag? Or how he taught group sex and he had multiple partners bowing down and doing whatever he wanted them to do because they worshipped him. And he convinced them that by pleasuring him in certain ways, they would be awakening and becoming enlightened. And this is not an isolated incident. That sad guru fellow on the YouTube there, I guarantee you. Now, he doesn't put those videos on the internet, or at least they haven't surfaced yet. But when you listen to some of his teachings, it's horseshit. It's new age bunk. It's garbage. Oh, but he's so pious. He's an old man and he's has the beard and he just talks to the right way and da. Nonsense. It's a play. It's an act. And we guarantee you that in his courses, in his seminars, in his retreats, we guarantee you that he seduces young, impressionable, naive women and possibly men. We don't know. He could be of that persuasion. But no false guru is a saint, and no false guru practices white tantra. They encourage fornication. And look at the world around us. This world is in hell. Is it any wonder that everywhere you turn, it's sex, 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 sex? And are you aware of that program that was on Netflix called Cuties? Where they were taking little children, little girls, and dressing them up in lingerie and S&M outfits and making them walk runways and the sexualization of these little children. It was the highest utmost of diabolical evil. Remember what we were telling you earlier about selling something. And you have that dirty feeling when someone's trying to sell you something. Why do they sell everything with sex? Why is everything sold with sex? Because sex is the most powerful force in the manifest universe. Sex is the Christ. It is the way to create the Christ. It is the power of creation. It's the way to create. It's not just the power of the creation. It is, and the Divine Mother, the sexual force, the Kundalini in the ninth sphere, she is the Christ. Make no mistake. She is the Christ. She is the Christ, the feminine aspect of Christ, which has masculine in it, like the Tao, which has descended into the physical form that we experience. In this case, the body. And we're going to share this. We're going to put this on screen, not so much because you have to read through this all right now, but we posted this on Facebook before. Everything you see here is embodied in sex. You have the fire, you have the waters, you have the swastika, you have the alm of life, the spiral, you have the serpent, Kundalini, and you have the cross, the law of three in the top right-hand corner here. The Tao, the cross, and the alm of life, the spiral, is the cross of life in motion. That's what the swastika is. That's why the swastika is so powerful, because the law of three is masculine, feminine, and union of masculine and feminine. But the swastika is the law of three in motion. It is the three factors: birth, death, and sacrifice. That the swastika is the path of the bodhisattva. That's why it appears in Tibetan Buddhism and on Buddhist shrines and temples, because Buddha Shakyamuni was a bodhisattva. And the swastika is the highest power. The swastika is the symbol of the Christ. So, of course, the Black Lodge, the Nazis, are going to use the most powerful symbols available to them to empower their dark ends. They want to create destruction. They want to create an empire. They want to create a new Aryan race and everything else that they wanted to do. They wanted to create chaos. They wanted to create the Second World War. They did. Everything is sold with sex because sex is, for us, white tantra, sexual alchemy. The path of the razor's edge is a hairline. It's path of the razor's edge because it's a razor's edge. It's that thin and that sharp and that dangerous. But it is also the path that gets us from where we are, where we long to be. And that's why it is said in the Bible that it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter into heaven. Because the entrance into heaven is said to be the narrow gate. Difficult is the road and narrow is the gate into heaven, and there are few who take it. But easy is the road and wide is the gate into hell. And there are many that take that. Just how wide is that gate? We talked about fear. We talked about lust. Okay? This is the spectrum of sex. And in the middle, we have the tightrope. We have the razor's edge. And on either side of this line, this is white tantra. This is what leads to love, strength, and transmutation. This is what leads to union of the lower self and the higher self, and union of masculine and feminine. This is the fusion. This is the fusion that leads to the birth of a son inside of us, to the birth of Christ inside of us. It's fusion. And it's rising up and in. That's what fusion is. You got to take your energy and you've got to direct it to the 0 point. And in us, the 0 point, yes, it's expanded into the 7 chakras and everything else, but the crown chakra, the highest point, represents our and the pineal gland represents our connection to the absolute infinite light. And if we raise our fire, our feminine fire and feminine light, our feminine force, our feminine energy up, illuminating all the chakras, and we reunite with our masculine counterpart, we create the androgen, we create the Christ. That's white tantra. That's spiritual sexuality. Now on either side, now this is important. Visualize someone walking a tightrope. Walking a tightrope across a great chasm. You don't have to be a tightrope walker or an expert in tightrope walking to know that the forces that are conspiring to make you fall off of that tightrope far exceed the mechanical forces of nature that are keeping you on the tightrope. It is the nature of the game that we play, this MMORPG called life. It is the nature of the game because the game has to be challenging. What use is it would it be to play a game that was easy? Why would you play a game that was easy? That would be boring. There'd be no challenge. Well, that's why people do things like tightrope walk. In fact, we recommend the movie called The Walk. Look it up. It's called The Walk. And we can't remember the name of the actor who stars in it, but he was in it. He's been in Inception, and he was in The Dark Knight Rises, I guess. Something Gordon Jason Lovett. Does that ring a bell? Gordon Jason Lovett. Anyway, he plays this Frenchman who walked across a tightrope between the two towers, the Twin Towers. And they made the movie after 9/11, which was interesting. But it was, I believe it was directed by Ron Howard, and it was quite good. But if you want to be able to visualize, this has some lovely cinematography, some lovely shots of him going across. And you know that many tightrope walkers, they use the balance beam, right? They use this long pole to balance themselves with, because balance is the key. Just look at this visualization. Look at this visual aid. We have the razor's edge in the middle, and what's balanced on these two sides is the fear-based spectrum of sex. Why is it fear-based? It's fear-based as follows. Because on either side of the razor's edge, if you go down the left-hand path here, this is the philosophy that sex is good, it's healthy, it's natural, and that the more orgasms you have and the more intense orgasms you have make you more spiritual. That's what this gradient is. So you begin with the kind of sexuality that's comfortable, that's comfy. It gives you the warmth and fuzzies, and makes you feel spiritual. It makes you feel comfortable. It feeds your mystic pride. It expels the energy, so you're relaxed and at peace, and you can let go, and you can be right. It's comfy, it's comfortable. But very quickly, that comfort changes to something else. And the next step is the fear of discomfort and the fear of anxiety and stress and all these other things, and that gets shifted to fear of being alone, fear of being left out, fear of and fear of not fulfilling your partner's desires, or not being fulfilled, or fear that there is greater sexual energy to be had, there's greater orgasms to be had, there's more to sexuality than your monogamous relationship. Fear that you're missing out, fear that you may be with the wrong person. So now this polyamory comes. The fear that you are holding back your partner, the fear that you're being possessive, the fear that you're being controlling. This is how clever fear can be, because remember, fear is control. So the comfort and security of being in the monogamous relationship means that you're probably very controlling and maybe even envious, jealous of other people, jealous of your partner. But then fear comes along and say, oh no, that's not spiritual. If you love someone, set them free. Love should be free. We should be able to be free to love who we want whenever we want. What's all this control stuff? Fear that sets up control, and then fear that comes around and controls us by having set up control. So it all breaks down, and we end up in polyamory. And if you may have seen this in spiritual groups that teach polyamory and polyamorous relationships, they have people write what are called soul contracts with one another. They're like little covenants, little agreements, little contracts that say that there's no possession, that there's no this, there's no jealousy, blah, blah, blah. We can only do this, we can only do that, we won't do this, we won't do that. And then they sign them, they exchange them. Soul contracts. Why do you need a contract with the people that you're having sex with, if not controlling and if not fear? Well, of course, this goes to the next level, because polyamory is still technically, you're just having sex with multiple partners, but not at the same time. This naturally leads to the next step, which is group polyamory. And again, it's fear that comes into play, control, because if you are a dominant individual, you will want to dominate multiple individuals at the same time. You will want to exert your alpha status, whether you're a male or a woman, and you will want to be pleasured by multiple people. You want your sex slaves, basically. And in that dynamic, you can, and unfortunately, because of the pornography industry and because of many other cultural factors, this has been normalized, right? The threesome, the foursome, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But in spiritual circles, it's much more than that. I mean the what do you call it? The like when there's a whole mass of people, the whole group of people, an orgy, right? Orgies are nothing new, right? Orgies go all the way back to the Greeks, and even before that to the Babylonians. So orgies are nothing new. Drunken orgies, the Dionysian festival, right? Everybody got drunk and just had this sexual free-for-all, right? It was just, and they called that spiritual. They thought that was spiritual. They thought that the alcohol was magical and taking them to these magical places. So of course they're going to be amorous. Of course they're going to have sex. And then naturally, this leads to the next step, which is once you're polyamorous, or once you're attracted to group sex or whatever, you're gonna make your way, and you think that this is spiritual, and you're connecting all of this to spiritual. Remember, this is the spectrum of spiritual sexuality in the minds of the practitioners. You're going to be attracted to a cult with a very charismatic leader, a very charismatic guru that's going to be teaching this. It's going to be saying, don't just have sex with any old group. Come and join a spiritual group. Be an initiate in our spiritual group, and be initiated into the secret rites and initiations and teachings of the ages. And in that group, invariably, you will be introduced to bona fide techniques of Black Tantra, and you will fall into total sexual degeneration, and you will be awakening at that point negatively. This is how this happens, and it's all based around fear, because fear of being left out, and fear of not being part of a group, fear of being alone, but also all along the line, there's also that control element. So either you're a dom or you're a submissive, right? And I'm not talking about you have to be into S&M. Every dynamic is like that. Either you're an alpha and you're a dominant, or you're submissive. So you either you want to take control, or you want to be led. You want to someone else to be in control, and you want someone to lead you. And that's the charismatic leaders take advantage of that, because they are alpha types, and their followers are mostly followers. They want to be led. They want to be controlled. So again, it's all fear-based. And then, of course, lust, of course, is part of all this. That goes without saying. On the other side of the spectrum, and we'll go through this relatively quickly, this is sex is a necessary evil. Less sex or none is more spiritual. That's what this philosophy is. And it begins with duty, right? I don't know if you've ever heard this expression, close your eyes and think of the queen, or close your eyes and think of the pope. What women used to be taught ages ago when they were in arranged marriages, and they were put into marriages with men who they did not love, and they certainly didn't want to have sex with, but it was their duty to bear children. It was their duty. And then, of course, you have the Catholic guilt coming into it, right? And you have to make, because, of course, their understanding of sex is fornication. They don't have any concept whatsoever of the razor's edge, right? That's why they know fornication is bad, but they haven't been taught white tantra. They haven't been taught the middle way. So they lack the complete picture. All they know is that fornication is bad. So the ego, fear, comes along. And remember we said that fear flips things? So fear can either lead you down this path, or fear can lead you down that path, because it flips it 180 degrees. The law of opposites. And then you get into the whole thing where you have to be ashamed of your sexuality, you have to be ashamed of your body, you have to cover yourself up, which is both fear and pride in this case, because it's fear of judgment, and it's social anxiety. We should be using our little pointer here, but we don't have it on here because it's not on our PowerPoint. And then finally, we get to the ultimate here, which is celibacy. And celibacy is very dangerous. If someone doesn't know how to practice pranayama, if someone doesn't know how to circulate the sexual force and work positively with the sexual force wants to flow. And it's not by accident that we have all of these sexually degenerated nuns and priests who have turned to pedophilia, and ultimately lust, power, and fornication is the result. They abuse children. those nuns in those schools, and those residential schools here in Canada, for example, they beat and abused and raped and tortured the students, the Aboriginal students and children, and celibate nuns who just became like grotesque, obsessive taskmasters, and violent and hateful and spiteful, because the desire for lust, right, and power consumes someone, the desire to be in control. If they're on the fear-based spectrum of sexuality, they're going to end up in lust, power, and fornication. This dynamic, one way or another. And the proof is in the pudding, right? We don't have to sell you on this. All we got to do is show you the path, the way that people, the step-by-step way in which people degenerate and fall deeper and deeper and deeper down into hell. And you know, just by the case studies around the world, just by the pedophile priests and everything, and on both sides, you know that this is true. You can deny it, but if you deny it, it's your ego that's denying it. Not everybody is going to fall into this, but remember, this is about sex and spirituality. We are focusing here specifically on people who equate in one way, shape, or form sex and spirituality, and they either equate it as more and more intense orgasms are more spiritual, or fewer or no sex whatsoever is more spiritual. So let's go back to our tightrope. There's our tightrope in the middle. This is our fall to our doom, and this is our fall to our doom. And it's the perfect balance, the middle way between these two. We can enjoy sex. We don't have to be ashamed of sex. We can enjoy it. We can engage in it in a loving relationship with our couple. We can literally make love. Literally make love. Just not give in to lust. Transmute our lust. Not allow lust to take us to where it wants to take us, down and out. Work with the sexual fire. Pray to our Divine Mother. And raise it up. And give birth to the fire of the fire and the light of lights. Now you see, though, the egos, they don't like this. They don't like this at all. They are, this does not go over well. If you have been a part of any threads on Facebook, where people have been discussing white tantra, you will see all the rationalizations and all the excuses why this can't possibly be, why there's nothing wrong with any of this, right? They might not come out and say it, but certainly this first part here is perfectly okay in their view. And for the vast majority of people who are asleep on this planet, they will never know anything else. But because of the porn industry, because of young people and the way they've been coddled and the way they've been raised without any ethics or morals whatsoever, it seems. They've been raised by the state, they've been raised by university, they've been raised by the internet, and pornography is available to all of them everywhere. It was not long ago that we heard the expression among teenagers and young adults, anal is the new oral. Now, the thing about anal sex is that even amongst animals, that it is not a sign of homosexuality amongst animals. It is a dominance behavior. In other words, it's all about control. And if it's about control, then it's fear-based. It's the same thing with oral sex. Oral sex is a control fetish. Who's dominant? Who's got who in their hands, or so to speak? Who's got who kneeling down in front of them, so to speak? It's all control. It's all domination. It's all fear wrapped up in lust. Fear is incompatible with love. It's incompatible with truth. It's incompatible with the spiritual path. So anything that has even a slight tinge of control or domination or domineering or that type, that's primal, brutal animal fear and control, and all of this that we're describing here. That's why it's important for us to point this out. It's not just a matter of lust. It's not just a matter of craving the orgasm. You know as well as I do that contemporary sexuality is not just about having sex, in the missionary position with your partner, with your spouse. There is so much more going on. And with the so-called rape culture that they talk about, which is violence, which is control, and feminism and everything else, and all this stuff that's wrapped around this confusion of contemporary sexuality. It's not a matter of, oh, I'm just having fun, I'm just having pleasure, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's perfectly natural, it's perfectly healthy. These are the rationalizations of ego mind. This is what we're witnessing here, and why we, I guess, are finishing off with this, is because this razor's edge, here you can see the forces that are pulling the spiritually inclined on this planet to the two extremes on either side that lead to sexual degeneration. Falling on either side of that tightrope. The ego doesn't care which way you fall, because in the end, it's going to get you in the end. The ego is going to get you in the end. If you fall this way, if you fall that way, the ego is patient. It'll wait 20 years with you as a celibate priest before you turn into a pedophile. And then it can really get what it wants. And the path to getting out of all this is to walk that tightrope, slow and steady and calmly, not with any fear, just with the awareness that your fear and lust and desire for control and desire for comfort and security, and your fear of death, and your fear of being left out, and your fear of being judged, and your fear of being different, being the black sheep, and all the subtle ways in which the ego has infested it and infected individuals and humanity through lust and through fear, and through the ego and the pride and the vanity and the narcissism, which comes along with, oh, I had a threesome last night, and how that feeds pride. Or someone who signed a soul contract with someone and went and had an affair with some, and then went home and felt ashamed. Or someone who had their group sex or had an orgy or whatever, or went and was seduced by a cult leader and gave the cult leader fellatio. and then went back to their dorm in the retreat and felt ashamed. And the next woman or man who went in and gave the cult leader a fellatio went back to his dormitory in the retreat center and was beaming with pride and mystic pride. Egos are clever, they're subtle, they're seductive, but ultimately they want to enslave us, and they do, and this humanity is enslaved. We can't afford to be naive. And if you have never understood or realized this before, the relationship between fear and lust on the spectrum of spiritual sexuality, and it's never even crossed your mind that fear and control are this intimately bound with all that new age bullshit and all the pedophilia and all the celibacy teachings out there. Now you know. Now you see it. It's not subtle anymore. It's in your face. It's hiding in plain sight. It's just you didn't know what to look for. You didn't have the eyes to see and the ears to hear it. So look within yourself. Meditate on your own sexuality, your own sexual practices, your own lust, your own desires. Is fear acting within you in your own sexuality? And as you explore that, and as you dive deeper into that in self-observation and meditation, you will see, and seeing is the first step to knowing. And knowing is half the battle. Knowing this, seeing this, knowing this is half the battle. The other half is comprehending the fear and the lust and comprehending how it is they get us to go either this way or that way, or in some cases both, because once you get down here, you're going in both directions. That's the irony of it. Because ultimately, it doesn't matter if you fall left, if you fall this way off the tightrope or that way off the tightrope, you are going down, you're falling. And that's the point. That's what they want. And egos don't care which way you fall, left or right. They don't. They just want you to fall off the tightrope. And it is a tightrope. It is that easy to fall. Make no mistake. We cannot afford to be naive, and we cannot afford to underestimate the adversary. Thank you to all of you who stuck it out 3 hours. We could probably keep going, actually, because it's that kind of a topic. However, we're going to call it a night. But before we do, we're going to sign off with a video, our theme song from our YouTube channel. By all means, you don't have to stick around to watch it, but we just wanted to share it with you. You may find it inspirational from someone who's on the path of the Bodhisattva. You may find it inspirational, especially in light of the topic that we discussed tonight, because it may seem like it's all doom and gloom, and it may seem like it's an uphill battle, or it's an unwinnable battle, or we're outmatched. But remember that we are never given a challenge that is more than what we can handle. And so, in light of that, please enjoy the following, and then we'll see you all hopefully on Friday night, and we'll announce the topic when we receive it. And you're all very welcome.